The public fails, not for lack of a newspaper or some secret tip, but because they are incapable of facing reality. The truth of the market is cold, silent, and cares nothing for the opinions you hold or the books you boast of reading. It does not matter what indicators you have on your chart. If you cannot master your own fear and greed when the movement tests you, and it always will, you are simply capital for the man who can. The market gives no warning and few second chances. It listens only to price and action. And the fool fails for one reason only. He violates the strict laws of discipline and risk, not as an exception, but as a rule. When he is finally wiped clean, he professes surprise, but the result was never uncertain. It was a mathematical certainty long before the final loss. I have seen great fortunes created and then destroyed. I have done both myself. The reasons are eternally the same. The patterns repeat like the changing of the seasons. Men enter the game driven by excitement or gossip, and they exit shattered by regret. They chase the noise, they reject the logic shown plainly on the tape, they trust the wrong man, and they refuse to accept the facts presented before them. The market shows them the path, and they march directly into the opposite direction. This is not about guessing the future. This is a business of cold, hard execution. What you think is irrelevant. What you do is the only metric that holds weight, and if you have not grasped this yet, the market is preparing a very expensive lesson for you. Every amateur begins with the enthusiasm of a new convert. He makes his first commitment, he earns a small profit, and suddenly he believes he is untouchable. It appears too simple, almost an insult to the difficulty of real speculation. He believes he has cracked the code. That initial profit is not a sign of skill. It is the most cunning trap the market sets. It teaches the wrong lesson entirely. It rewards pure randomness and disguises it as genius. The most dangerous moment for any speculator is when he confuses beginner's luck with genuine talent. This illusion is potent. It manufactures profound arrogance, and arrogance is the invitation for catastrophe. They increase their size too quickly. They dismiss their structure. They assume what worked once will work forever. But the market owes no man consistency. It does not recognize your previous successes. It only reacts to the present reality of price movement. I made this exact mistake early in my own career. When I was winning constantly in the bucket shops, I believed I had mastered the world. But those places were a mere kindergarten. When I moved to the real exchanges, the reality was stark. My execution slowed, the spreads widened, and the small edge I relied upon evaporated. My capital vanished quicker than I could have imagined, not because my method failed, but because I had not understood that the market punishes confidence unsupported by strict structure. Overconfidence is nothing more than excessive exposure. This is what the overwhelming majority never grasp. The objective is not to be correct. The objective is to survive. Those who remain in the game past the first cycle are not the sharpest men. They are merely the most disciplined. They learn swiftly that a winning trade can teach you very little, but a stinging loss, analyzed and dissected, is the investment that saves future fortunes. The market cares nothing for your early results, and neither should you. The only measure that holds value is what you do consistently when the inevitable test arrives. There is one mistake, more costly than any entry error or missed pivot. It is holding a position that has gone against you, simply hoping that the price will come back to save your dignity. That silent vigil, that need to wait, just a little longer, wipes out more accounts than any panic ever could. The initial loss is always small, a few ticks, a natural pullback, nothing that alarms the senses. But then comes the hesitation. Instead of closing the position cleanly, the speculator simply watches the price move further away. He does not act. He rationalizes. He assures himself it is temporary, adjusts his time frame, and hunts for news that confirms his bias. Deep down, he knows he is wrong, but he lacks the courage to admit it. Hope becomes his system, replacing logic entirely. The longer he holds, the more difficult the exit becomes. The financial loss grows, and so does the emotional weight. Soon, the loss is no longer just a number on the board. It infects his judgment, his identity. He refuses to liquidate, not because he believes the trade is sound, but because closing the book means conceding defeat. I have been that fool. I once held a position far beyond the prescribed limits of my stop. I provided myself with every reason: temporary market noise, misunderstood sentiment, a momentary pullback. All of it was pure fiction. The result was indisputable fact. I lost more on that single commitment than I had made in the preceding 5 trades combined. It was not the market that defeated me. It was my refusal to obey my own limit. A small loss is merely a trade. A large loss is a profound and unrecoverable mistake. The difference between the two is merely time. Every second you delay closing a losing bet, you are donating your capital to the game. The smartest men in this business are not those who win the most often. They are the ones who lose the least. They accept their losses swiftly, cleanly, without negotiation. They liquidate what is not working and keep their powder dry because they know this absolute truth. If you cannot take a small loss willingly, you will eventually be forced to take a colossal one, and when that day arrives, your career as a speculator is finished. Most men never build a structured methodology. They follow feelings, rumors, opinions, and desperate hope. They pursue setups they do not understand, enter positions without clear signals, and exit based on the panic of the moment rather than established rules. This is not speculation. This is merely guessing, and the market shows no mercy for the guesser. I learned early that instinct is a fickle partner. What felt right this morning often looked utterly foolish by the close. But a system, one that has been tested, refined, and committed to rigorously, is the only defense you possess against the inherent chaos of price movement. Without it, every trade is reduced to an emotional whim, and emotional decisions possess no profitable edge. There was a time when I acted purely on impulse. I saw a ticker moving and I plunged in without a plan, without confirmation. Just the thrill of the chase. Sometimes it paid, more often it ruined the day. But the real damage was the inconsistency. I had no benchmark for success or failure because I had established no rules to measure against. That is when I grasped the fundamental truth. Without a defined system, I was not a speculator. I was merely a gambler with a clean collar. A worthwhile trading system need not be complex. It must simply be yours. It must define precisely the moment to enter, the capital at risk, the location of your protective stop, and the necessary exit criteria. It must be repeatable, measurable, and anchored in logic, never in sentiment. And above all else, it must be followed without exception. You do not rise in this game by predicting the precise turn of the future. You rise by responding cleanly and consistently to the reality presented by the tape. A system grants you this capability. It eliminates the paralyzing doubt and replaces it with reliable structure. Without it, even a favorable trade can teach a destructive lesson, and a losing commitment can wipe out far more than capital. The market punishes randomness. It exposes improvisation immediately. If you wish to survive, build a system. If you intend to profit, follow it every single time. Emotions are the silent destroyers of capital. They do not arrive shouting. They whisper. They instruct you to hold for a little more. They convince you to disregard your stop loss. They make a modest profit feel like a failure of ambition, and a devastating loss feel like a challenge to be conquered. If you fail to recognize them, they will seize control of every decision, and they will lead you straight to ruin. Fear is the primary enemy. It appears when a position moves against you, not because the financial loss is unbearable, but because the pain of being proven wrong is overwhelming. Fear freezes your hand when you should be acting decisively. It convinces you to wait, to plead, to believe the entire market will reverse course solely for your benefit. But the market does not reward belief. It rewards the ruthless efficiency of execution. Then comes greed. It arrives not during a slump, but during success. A trade turns profitable, and suddenly you desire more than the plan allotted. The structure softens, discipline dissolves, and the thought of giving back any portion of that profit becomes intolerable. So you exit too soon, or worse, you overextend, chasing a move that has already run its course. What began as a clear, logical decision descends into an emotional melee. I have experienced both extremes. I have closed positions prematurely because I became nervous, and I have ignored my exits because I was desperate for that extra eighth. In every instance, the result was worse than if I had simply followed my written rule. The lesson is permanent. Your emotions are not your guidance. They are your crucible. You cannot eliminate feeling, but you must contain it. That containment is discipline. It is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the strength required to act when uncertainty paralyzes the crowd, to obey your rules when every instinct screams rebellion, and to do this consistently, time after time. A method is only as sound as your capacity to execute it without internal interference. If your emotions direct your commitments, your results will always belong to them, not to you. The speculators who endure this game are not those who feel nothing. They are those who act in spite of what they feel. A fundamental error among the public is the belief that larger size translates directly into greater profit. This assumption has liquidated more accounts than all poor setups combined. What most fail to comprehend is that risk is measured not by how right you are, but by how wrong you can afford to be, and how quickly you can stop the resulting damage. I never entered a position at full size instantly. I tested the market. I waited for confirmation. I allowed the tape to prove my thesis correct before I increased my exposure. If the commitment worked, I added to it. If it did not, I simply stepped away. This was not hesitation, it was self-protection. I was not in this game to prove a point, I was in it to last. I have watched countless men enter with maximum commitment on an unconfirmed move, only to panic at the first minor setback. The trade might have eventually been profitable, but their commitment was too large to survive a natural reaction. They did not lose because they were fundamentally wrong. They lost because they bet everything on being right too soon. Overtrading is merely a symptom of the same disease. When one commitment ends, they immediately chase the next, not because the opportunity is valid, but because they cannot endure sitting still. They confuse constant motion with productive work, but the market does not compensate you for trading more often. It compensates you for trading with accuracy. Risk itself is not the enemy. The mismanagement of it is fatal. Proper sizing preserves your ability to continue speculating. It gives you the necessary space to think, to adjust, to remain a player in the game. You do not conquer this business through bravado. You conquer it through precision. The market does not care for your ambition, your confidence, or your desperate need to recoup a prior defeat. It cares only about your action. The speculator who controls his size controls his survival, for one over-leveraged position is all it takes to erase years of careful discipline. Every speculator takes losses. That is unavoidable tuition. What separates the men from the boys is what happens after that loss. Most search for external factors to blame: the news, the timing, simple bad luck. Rarely do they look inward. That unwillingness is the clear dividing line between those who improve and those who simply vanish. A loss is not failure. A loss is essential data. It is a report card that judges your system, your adherence to discipline, and your respect for the structure you claim to follow. Ignoring that information is the most costly action a speculator can take. I recall taking a loss that destroyed a full month's worth of labor. It stung, but I did not walk away angry. I documented it. I dismantled the trade entirely. I asked the difficult questions. Did I follow my plan? Was the commitment size appropriate? Was the setup even valid in the first place? The process was painful, but the clarity it delivered made me 10 times stronger. What the typical amateur does is bury the mistake. They avoid the raw numbers, they manipulate the narrative, and they move on without having absorbed why the defeat occurred. Then they repeat the exact same error in the next commitment, and the cycle accelerates. This is not learning. This is denial. The market is a professor that never ceases testing, and it does not grade on forgiveness. If you fail to learn from the pain, it will keep returning, not because the market is cruel, but because you are providing it permission to do so. A speculator who cannot meticulously study his own losses is indistinguishable from a common gambler. Both operate without correction, and in due course both end in the exact same condition: broke. Losses are unavoidable, but they are only truly wasted if you fail to extract the lesson. The man who records, reflects, and refines his approach after every setback builds an edge no chart pattern can provide. The one who does not will not be around to apply any lesson at all. The constant need to be invested, to always have a position, is perhaps the most destructive habit a speculator can cultivate. Many believe that if they are not actively pressing buttons, they are falling behind the action. The brutal truth is that most of the time doing nothing is the sharpest decision available. I learned to wait. I mastered the art of sitting squarely on my hands until the market presented the exact conditions I required. The setup needed to be flawless. The overall alignment had to be perfect. My own focus had to be absolute. If any element was missing, I remained flat. Not because I feared the risk, but because I respected the cost of being wrong. Most traders overtrade, not because a clear opportunity exists, but because they suffer from the fear of missing out. They confuse constant motion with professional progress. Constant motion is simply friction, and friction in this game is prohibitive. Every unnecessary entry, every premature exit, every moment spent in a marginal position compounds the loss, not only financially but mentally. Some of my most substantial fortunes came not from a high volume of trades, but from a handful of commitments held with unshakable conviction. To reach those precise opportunities, I waited. I ignored the distracting noise. I passed on setups that failed to meet my exacting criteria. I allowed the amateurs to chase the quick movement while I preserved my capital and my clarity. There is a vast difference between being active and being genuinely productive. You are not compensated for activity, you are compensated for accuracy. And accuracy requires exceptional patience. It demands control to watch the market move without you and remain entirely calm. It requires the maturity to understand that your edge lies not in the frequency of your action, but in the quality of your execution when the precise moment aligns. The market is a ceaseless storm. If you attempt to ride every cresting wave, you will drown. But if you wait patiently for the one wave that travels precisely with your wind, you will ride it further than the vast majority ever will. There is no shortage of advice in this line of work. Brokers, acquaintances, complete strangers, all are eager to share their certainties about what you must do next. But the market does not reward borrowed conviction. It only responds to the decisions you execute. And if those actions are predicated on someone else's belief, you are already dangerously exposed. I've committed capital based on tips. I've followed advice from men who spoke with absolute certainty. It never ever ended well. Not necessarily because their idea was wrong, but because I had no fundamental understanding of the logic behind it. I was not trading the established setup. I was trading the person, and that is a failing the market punishes every time. The moment you rely on external thinking, you abandon your own. You cease analysis. You suspend planning. You act based on sheer emotional comfort or the debilitating fear of missing the move. You follow a rumor, not a systematic structure. And worst of all, when the commitment turns against you, you possess no framework for recovery because the initial decision was never truly yours. I learned to trust one thing only: the tape. It showed me everything required: intention, pressure, exhaustion, and strength. It needed no accompanying headlines or commentary. It only required dedicated attention and respect. Every time I followed the clear message of the tape, I traded with certainty. Every time I yielded to the noise of others, I traded with doubt. You may learn from great men. You must study history diligently. But when the precise moment comes to act, your decision must be entirely your own. It must be derived from your methodology, your rigorous analysis, and your complete readiness to accept the final outcome, win or lose. If you cannot place your confidence in your own decision-making process, you are not yet prepared to risk significant capital. And if you consistently outsource your trading to the opinions of the outside world, you are not speculating. You are merely following. In this market, followers rarely survive. Most speculators have memorized the old adage, cut your losses short, let your profits run. They nod approvingly. They preach it to others. But when the pressure mounts, when the chart flickers red or the position drifts against them, they execute the exact opposite. They take the small profit on the winner and they hold the devastating loss on the failure, and then they stand bewildered as to why their results never advance. This rule is not a clever slogan. It is the absolute core of survival. It exists because the market is fundamentally unpredictable, and the only reliable method to extract continuous profit is to strictly limit damage while permitting strength to pay you fully. But that requires iron discipline, and discipline is a precious commodity. The reason speculators violate this fundamental law is not a lack of market knowledge. It is the destructive interference of emotion. Fear compels them to snatch small profits prematurely, terrified of losing what they momentarily possess. Hope whispers to them to grant the losing commitment more time for a miracle. Both of these voices sound perfectly reasonable, and neither will ever serve your ultimate goal. When I adhered strictly to this mandate, I built genuine momentum. I allowed a strong commitment to breathe, to expand, and to compensate me fully. Simultaneously, I exited losers before they could drain my essential capital or my confidence. The favorable results were never immediate, but over time they became unassailable. My account was sounder. My mindset was focused. When I ignored the rule, the damage was cumulative. A small, early profit felt like a victory, but it only served to mask an exponentially larger loss that was permitted to grow. By the time I finally accepted the mistake, the cost was exponentially greater than it should have been. Speculators fail not because they ignore the rule, but because they lack the necessary control to execute it. If you master this single behavior, cutting losses swiftly and letting winning commitments run, you separate yourself completely from the 90% who fail. This is the dividing line. On one side are the men who guess, react, and regret. On the other are the men who observe, act, and endure. The market offers both paths, but only one permits you to remain in the game long enough to secure a lasting fortune. If you have persisted this far, you have already demonstrated a measure of character that most do not possess. Most men actively avoid facing the truth behind failure. They seek shortcuts. They desperately desire a secret key. But the truth is, the edge is never hidden. It is merely difficult, and that difficulty is precisely why it works for the few who apply themselves. You have now heard the true reasons, not mere opinions, but the core behaviors that separate the survivors from the vanished, cutting losses without hesitation, allowing profits to mature without fear, speculating with structure, ignoring the persistent noise, acting with discipline, not destructive sentiment. These are not mere tips. They are the immutable principles of the game. They do not age, they do not change, and they will not forgive any man who attempts to break them. The majority fail, but you are not obligated to join them. Remember this: the market is not your enemy. Your own undisciplined habits are. Correct them, and the market becomes something else entirely, not a threat, but a stark mirror. If what you reflect back is structure, patience, and control, what you receive in return may very well surprise you. Keep your head clear. Trade with reason, and never forget the lesson of the tape. If you want to understand the true psychology of speculation, you must read the one book that defines the game. I'm talking about Reminiscences of a Stock Operator. It is not historical. It is a permanent education in human nature and market cycles. The book is pure truth. Get your copy today. The link is in the description below.